The grand old building of the Roland Conservatory of Music was finally quiet. The last echoing notes of a student's violin, the final slam of a locker door, the last chatter about arpeggios and audition anxiety, all of it had faded into the evening. Now, the only sounds were the soft sigh of the wind against the high windows and the steady, rhythmic squeak of a wheel on a cleaning cart. She pushed the cart slowly, her shoes making no sound on the polished marble floor. Her name was Elena, and for 6 nights a week, these hallways were her domain. At 58, her life had settled into a predictable rhythm, much like the slow, steady pace of her work. She was a small woman, her dark hair streaked with silver and pulled into a practical bun. Her hands, which moved with efficient grace as she emptied trash bins and wiped surfaces, were strong, the skin lined and calloused from a lifetime of labor. The conservatory was a world of beautiful chaos during the day. Now, under the dim, overnight lights, it felt like a museum of silent potential. Practice room doors stood slightly ajar, revealing the shadowy shapes of pianos like sleeping giants. Sheet music, sometimes perfectly ordered, sometimes in frantic piles, lay on stands waiting for the next day's battle. Elena moved through it all like a ghost, restoring order. Her routine was methodical. She started in the administrative offices, emptying wastebaskets filled with coffee cups and crumpled paper. She would carefully dust the framed portraits of famous composers who frowned down from the walls. She never rushed. There was a peace in this empty building, a stillness that she preferred to the noisy bustle of the city outside. But her pace always changed subtly when her work drew her closer to the practice wing. As she approached room 3, her most regular stop, she would pause outside the door for just a second, as if listening for something. Then she would push the door open. Inside was a beautiful, grand piano, a Steinway. It sat in the middle of the room, a pool of dark, polished wood in the semi-darkness. Moonlight often streamed through the window, painting a silver stripe across its closed lid. This was Elena's favorite part of her night. She would approach the instrument not just as a cleaner, but with a kind of reverence. She began her work. She dusted the lid meticulously, her cloth moving in slow, circular motions, feeling the perfect smoothness of the lacquer. She polished the music stand until it shone. She would then lift the keyboard cover, exposing the row of black and white keys. They seemed to glow in the low light. She took a special, softer cloth and began to clean each key, one by one. It was a task that required attention, but her attention went deeper than just removing fingerprints. As she wiped from the low, rumbling bass notes up to the tiny, tinkling treble, her eyes would trace the patterns. Sometimes, her fingers, holding the cloth, would hesitate. The index finger of her right hand might press down silently on a middle C, feeling the cool, firm resistance of the key without making a sound. Her thumb might brush over a cluster of notes, a silent chord. Her hands, those capable, work-worn hands, seemed to know where to go. They would hover, tracing invisible shapes in the air just above the ivory, dancing a memory of a dance they once knew by heart. A student had left a book of sheet music open on the stand earlier that day. It was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Elena's eyes scanned the lines of notes, the flowing curves of the musical staff. She didn't just see ink on paper. In her mind, a quiet, perfect version of the piece began to play. She could hear the gentle, rocking bass line, the sweet, singing melody above it. Her throat tightened almost imperceptibly. Her cleaning hand stilled. For a full minute, she was not in a practice room at all, but somewhere else, a long time ago. In a room filled with sunlight and the smell of old wood, with someone humming along. The sudden buzz of the floor buffer from the hallway outside broke the spell. She blinked, gently closed the piano's keyboard cover, and smoothed the front of her simple blue janitorial uniform. The memory, vivid and sweet, receded back into the shadows of her mind where it lived. She finished the room, emptied the small trash can of empty water bottles and pencil shavings, and wheeled her cart back into the hallway. A young professor, staying late to grade papers, passed her with a tired smile and a nod. "Evening, Elena." "Good evening, sir," she replied softly, her voice carrying the soft, rolling accent of her homeland, a country far away that most students here couldn't place. They saw a quiet, older woman who did her job well and kept to herself. They appreciated that she was careful, that she never banged into the instruments or disturbed the sacred space of the practice rooms. She was part of the building's background, as reliable and unnoticed as the heating pipes. What they didn't see was the way she listened. As she mopped the main hall floor, she could hear a student in a distant room repeating a difficult scale, stumbling over the same transition again and again. Elena would pause, mop in hand, her head tilted slightly. Inside, she could feel the solution: a slight shift of the wrist, a different fingering. The advice sat on her tongue, a phantom instruction she would never voice. What they didn't see was the small, private sadness in her eyes when she found a piano treated poorly, candy wrappers shoved beside the keys, a coffee cup leaving a ring on the wood. To her, it wasn't just furniture, it was a soul waiting to speak. And what they absolutely could never guess was the history in her fingers. The calluses weren't just from mops and buckets. Once, a lifetime ago, they had formed from hours upon hours of pressing piano keys. Those faint lines on her palms, they followed the pathways of muscles trained for agility and strength of a very different kind. She finished her rounds in the large concert hall. It was vast and dark, the empty seats like a silent audience. On the enormous stage sat the crown jewel of the conservatory, a concert grand piano. She didn't clean this one. That was a specialist's job. But she would always walk to the edge of the stage and look at it. The sheer size of it, the potential for thunderous sound or the most delicate whisper, filled her with a familiar awe. One night, daring greatly, she climbed the few steps onto the stage. The wooden floorboards creaked under her soft-soled shoes. She walked to the piano and, very slowly, reached out. With just the tip of her finger, she touched the very edge of its polished side. It was cold and smooth. A shiver went through her, not of fear, but of a connection so old it felt like a heartbeat from another life. A noise from the balcony made her pull her hand back as if burned. It was just the old building settling. But the moment was over. She was Elena the cleaner again, not the girl who had once dreamed of sitting on a stage like this. She returned to her cart, her heart slowing back to its normal, steady rhythm. Her shift was nearly over. The first hints of dawn would soon blush at the edges of the sky. She would clock out, walk to the bus stop, and ride to her small, tidy apartment where a single photograph of her as a young woman, seated proudly at a piano, sat on a bookshelf. A secret smile would touch her lips as she made her tea, remembering the feel of the Steinway's keys under her silent fingers. The genius within her wasn't gone. It wasn't even sleeping. It was wide awake, living a vivid, parallel life inside her mind and memory, listening to the world of music around her, and waiting, though she didn't even know it herself. It was waiting for a key, a chance, a single, careless spark to bring it back into the light. For now, it was enough to be near the instruments, to care for them, to love them from a distance in the quiet of the night. The peace of the nighttime conservatory was a fragile thing. It could be broken by something as simple as a frustrated genius. Leo was considered one of the stars of the senior class. He had the hands for it, long, flexible fingers and a sharp mind that could dissect complex scores. But he also carried a cloud of intensity around him, a belief that the world, and especially music, should bend to his will. Tonight, it wasn't bending. It was breaking. He was in practice room 3, the one with the good Steinway. For 2 hours, he had been wrestling with a beast, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. It was a piece of stormy, dramatic Russian passion, full of crashing chords and furious, running passages. Leo could play the notes. He could hit them with technical accuracy. But the piece sounded hollow, like a convincing fake of a thunderstorm, all noise, no feeling. The soul of it, the deep, tumultuous grief and defiance, eluded him. His teacher had said, "You need to find the story. What is this anger about?" But Leo didn't want a story. He wanted mastery. He wanted control. And the piano, for once, was refusing to give it to him. With a final, snarled curse, he brought his hands down in a discordant slam onto the keys. The piano gave out a horrible, jarring sound that echoed in the small room. He shoved the bench back, its legs screeching on the floor. He grabbed his bag, stuffed the expensive sheet music in carelessly, and stormed out of the room, leaving the door swinging open behind him. He left the piano keyboard open, the bench at a crooked angle, and his half-empty coffee cup, sitting right on the polished wood, lit a cardinal sin in the conservatory. He was almost to the front doors when he patted his pockets. His phone. He'd left it on the piano's music desk. Grumbling, he turned on his heel and marched back, his footsteps loud and angry in the silent hall. Elena had just arrived at the door of room 3. She had heard the violent, unhappy sounds from down the hall and had waited for them to stop. She saw the young man. She knew him by sight, one of the intense, talented ones, storm out. She gave him a wide berth, a faint line of worry between her eyebrows. She didn't like to see the instruments treated with anger. She pushed her cart quietly to the doorway and looked in at the mess. It was a small chaos, but it spoke of a large frustration. She sighed softly, a motherly sound, and got to work. First, she carefully lifted the coffee cup. There was a faint ring already. She sprayed a little cleaner on her cloth and began to gently polish it away, her touch firm but infinitely careful. She then righted the heavy piano bench, sliding it back into its proper place. Finally, she turned to the sheet music left behind. It wasn't his expensive book. It was a photocopy of the Rachmaninoff, covered in pencil marks, fingering notations, circled passages, angry question marks. She picked it up to place it neatly on the side table. As she did, her eyes naturally fell on the page. It was the most difficult section, a cascade of notes in the left hand against a sharp, singing melody in the right. Her mind, as it always did, began to read it. Not just see it, but asterisk here, asterisk it. She could feel the physical memory in her left hand, the stretch and the roll required to make those chords speak, not just pound. She could hear how the melody needed to weep, not shout. She was so absorbed in this silent rehearsal that she didn't hear the footsteps return. Leo appeared in the doorway. He saw the janitor woman holding his music, staring at it. He didn't see the understanding in her eyes. He saw what he expected to see. A cleaner looking at a confusing jumble of lines and dots. All his bottled up frustration from the last 2 hours found a ready outlet. Thinking of giving it a try. His voice cut through the quiet, sharp and laced with sarcasm. You can put it down. It's not a cleaning manual. It's harder than it looks. Elena flinched as if he'd thrown something at her. Very slowly, she lowered the sheet music to the table, smoothing it flat. A rush of heat went through her cheeks, a mixture of shame and a very old, familiar pain. She kept her eyes down on the pattern of the floor tiles. Leo strode into the room, grabbed his phone from the music desk. He looked at her, expecting maybe an apology or a hurried exit, but she just stood there, her head slightly bowed. He felt a twinge of something, not guilt, but irritation at her silence. Just be careful with the stuff, okay? He said, his tone still brusque, but without the sharp edge. He left again, his phone in hand, already scrolling. The incident dismissed from his mind the moment he passed through the doors. Elena didn't move for a long time. The room felt different now. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It was heavy. The air seemed to hum with the echo of his words. Asterisk harder than it looks. Asterisk they weren't just words about a piano piece. They felt like a verdict on her whole life. On the distance between the woman she was now and the girl she had been. She finished cleaning the room with mechanical movements. She closed the piano lid, but this time, she didn't let her fingers linger. She avoided touching the keys at all. The silent music that usually played in her head was gone, replaced by that single, dismissive phrase. For the rest of her shift, she was quieter than usual. The friendly night security guard, an older man with a kind face, said his usual "Everything all right, Elena?" And she just nodded, offering a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But something had been stirred up. A challenge, even a cruel and careless one, has a strange power. It's a door cracked open. You can choose to shut it firmly, or you can peek through to the other side. That night, in her small apartment, she didn't make tea right away. She went to her bookshelf and took down the framed photograph. It was black and white, faded at the edges. In it, a girl of about 16 sat straight and proud at an upright piano. Her hair was dark and long, her eyes bright with concentration and joy. The room was simple, but sunlight streamed across the floor. That girl knew who she was. She knew where she belonged. Elena traced the glass over the girl's face. She looked at the piano in the picture, so much plainer than the majestic Steinways she cleaned. Yet, it had been everything. Asterisk it's harder than it looks. Asterisk the young man's voice echoed in her memory. And for the first time in decades, a different voice answered it from deep within her. It was her own voice, younger, firm with certainty. Asterisk I know. Asterisk it was just a whisper. But it was there. The gauntlet had been thrown. Not to the tired cleaner she was now, but to the ghost of that girl in the photograph. And the ghost was listening. The old conservatory building held its breath in the deepest hours of the night. The only soul stirring was Ben, the night security guard. He was a round man in his late 60s, with a kind face framed by a trim white beard. He'd been a music teacher for 40 years before retiring, and he took this job not for the money, but to stay close to the sounds he loved. His nightly rounds were slow, a familiar ritual. He'd check doors, listen to the hum of the boilers, and sometimes, if a particularly dedicated student was burning the midnight oil, he'd pause outside a door to enjoy a private concert. Tonight was quiet. Most of the practice room lights were off. As he shuffled down the main hallway, his heavy keys jingling softly at his hip, he thought he heard something. He stopped. It was music, not from a practice room, but from the main concert hall. This was unusual. No one was booked for the hall at this hour. The sound was faint, the great doors being mostly closed, then moved closer, his old teacher's ear straining. It was piano music, but unlike any student playing he'd ever heard. This wasn't practice. This was a story. He pushed one of the heavy doors open just a crack, careful not to make a sound. The vast hall was dark, lit only by the pale blue emergency exit signs and a single, lonely work light on the stage. And there, at the colossal concert grand piano, sat a figure. It took Ben a second to recognize her. It was the cleaner, the quiet woman with the accent, Elena. She was still in her blue janitor's uniform, her cart parked in the aisle near the stage steps. But her posture was utterly transformed. She sat straight, yet completely relaxed, her shoulders down, her head tilted slightly as if listening to a voice only she could hear. Her hands moved over the keyboard. And the music. The music was Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor. But Ben had never heard it played like this. He had taught this piece. He had heard gifted students perform it with flawless technique. But this was different. This was understanding. This was memory turned into sound. The left hand played the gentle, rocking rhythm not as a simple accompaniment, but as a heartbeat steady, patient, carrying the weight of years. The right hand sang the melody, and here was the true miracle. It wasn't just sweet or sad. It was layered. He could hear loneliness in it, yes, a deep and quiet longing. But there was also tenderness, a love for the music itself that was so pure it made his throat ache. And underneath it all, a thread of incredible strength, a resilience that held the sorrow without being broken by it. Her eyes were closed. She was not playing for an audience. She was playing for someone in the past, or for a version of herself left behind. Her face, usually so careful and neutral, was alive with feeling. A slight frown of concentration here, a softening of the lips there. The calloused hands that mopped floors and carried trash now danced, flowed, and pleated across the ivory. Ben forgot he was a security guard. He became a listener, captivated. He leaned against the doorframe, his own breathing shallow. He watched her shape each phrase, how she let some notes fade into a whisper so delicate he could barely hear it, and how others swelled with a warmth that filled the dark hall. This was not someone who had learned piano. This was someone who had lived with it, who had spoken through it, who had once known it as her first language. A part of him, the teacher part, screamed that this was wrong. She wasn't supposed to be here. She could get in trouble. But a bigger part, the part that loved music more than rules, told that voice to be silent. To witness this felt like a privilege. The piece drew to its close, the final chords dissolving into the quiet of the hall like a sigh. Elena's hands came to rest in her lap. She sat still for a long moment, her head still bowed, as if waking from a dream. Then, her shoulders slumped back into their usual curve. She was the cleaner again. She reached out and gently closed the keyboard cover, her touch reverent. It was then that Ben remembered where he was. He should announce himself. He should do something. But he couldn't break the spell, not yet. And a practical thought occurred to him. No one would ever believe this. He could barely believe it. And he was seeing it with his own eyes, silently. He pulled his old smartphone from his pocket. He hated the thing, but his daughter had insisted he carry it. With clumsy fingers, he opened the camera. He wasn't trying to spy. He just needed proof, for himself if for no one else, that this had happened, that this kind of beauty could exist in the middle of a mundane night. He hit record, holding the phone steady in the crack of the door. She was playing a different piece now, something simpler, older, a Bach prelude. It was clean, precise, and full of a quiet intelligence. He recorded for about a minute, until she finished the short piece. He saw her look at her hands in the dim light, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. Then she stood up, brushed her uniform straight, and walked down the stage steps to her cart. Ben quickly stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, his heart pounding strangely. He heard the soft squeak of her cart moving away, heading towards the service elevator. He stood in the dark for a long time, the phone heavy in his hand. He played the video back, the sound tinny through the small speaker. But even through the poor recording, the magic was there. The truth of it was there. This wasn't a party trick or a hidden talent. This was a submerged artist, a life diverted, a river forced underground that had finally found a crack to the surface. He thought about the young Hashot, Leo, and his noisy struggles in the practice room. He thought about the professors who spoke of talent and technique as if they were things you could teach in a textbook, and he thought of Elena, silent for all these months, polishing the piano she must have ached to play. Ben wasn't a man who liked drama. He believed in peace, quiet, and a well-run building. But this felt too big to keep to himself. This felt like a secret the music itself wanted to tell. He knew what he had to do. He wouldn't go to the main administration. They'd likely just give her a warning about after-hours rules. He needed to go to someone who would understand, not just the music, but the human story behind it. He waited until his shift ended at dawn. Instead of going home, he sat in the security office, the phone on the desk in front of him. He waited for the one person he trusted to listen. The head of the piano department, a man named Dr. Alastair Finch, was always in his office by 7, drinking tea and preparing for the day. Ben would show him. He would let the music speak for itself. As the first light of morning tinted the sky gray outside the window, Ben looked at the frozen image on his screen, a small woman in a cleaner's uniform, lost in a world of her own making at a magnificent piano. He shook his head, a slow smile spreading across his face. Well, he whispered to the empty room, I'll be damned. The night's quiet had been broken, not by a disturbance, but by a revelation, and it was his job, he felt, to see it through. Dr. Alastair Finch's office was a cave of organized chaos. Towers of sheet music leaned against walls. Books with cracked spines filled every shelf, and framed concert programs chronicled a lifetime in music. At 7 in the morning, he was already there, steam curling from a large mug of Earl Grey tea as he frowned at a student's proposed recital program. A gentle knock on his open door made him look up. It was Ben, the night guard. This was unusual. Ben was a friendly ghost of the building, seen at shift changes, but he never came to the offices. Ben, everything all right? Dr. Finch asked, putting his pen down. More than all right, doctor. Something happened last night. I think you need to see it. Ben's voice was low, earnest. He wasn't a man given to excitement, which made his serious tone all the more compelling. He walked in and placed his smartphone on the cluttered desk. Dr. Finch, a man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a head of thinning gray hair, looked puzzled. See what? Just watch, listen. Ben tapped the screen, and the video began to play. At first, Dr. Finch's expression was one of polite curiosity. He saw the dark concert hall, the figure at the piano. He recognized the cleaner, the woman from the evening staff. A flicker of concern crossed his face. Was this a security issue? Then the music began. Chopin. Within 3 bars, the polite curiosity vanished. His eyebrows lifted. He leaned forward, pulling the phone closer. He didn't just hear the notes. He heard the phrasing, the touch, the profound musicality. This wasn't imitation. This was interpretation. This was someone who didn't just play Chopin. They conversed with him. The poor audio couldn't hide the emotion, the control, the lifetime of understanding in every deliberate silence between the notes. When the minute-long clip ended, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the office radiator. Dr. Finch leaned back in his leather chair, staring at the now black screen. He took a slow sip of his tea, his mind racing. That's Elena, Ben said quietly. The cleaning lady. She was playing the concert grand. After hours, I can see that, Dr. Finch said softly, almost to himself. He looked at Ben. Has she done this before? I don't know. Last night was the first time I saw it. But the way she sat down, it wasn't like she was trying it out. It was like she was coming home. Dr. Finch nodded slowly. He was a scholar, but first and foremost, he was a listener. And what he had heard moved him deeply. It also presented a mystery. A woman with this level of artistry working as a nighttime cleaner? It made no sense. Thank you, Ben, he said finally, his voice firm with decision. This was the right thing to do. May I keep this video for now? Ben nodded, relieved. Of course, doctor, someone needed to know. After Ben left, Dr. Finch spent the morning not on his work, but on a quiet investigation. He checked the staff files. Elena's employment record was sparse, a social security number, an address, a start date 2 years prior. No prior musical employment, no education listed beyond a foreign high school diploma. It was a dead end. He knew then he had to talk to her directly. But how? He didn't want to frighten her, or make her think she was in trouble. He waited until late afternoon, when the daytime cleaners were beginning their shifts. He found the custodial supervisor, a practical woman named Rosa. Rosa, I need to speak with one of your evening staff, Elena. It's not a complaint," he added quickly, seeing her defensive look. "It's a personal matter regarding the building. Could you ask her if she could come to my office for a few minutes before her shift starts tonight? Assure her it's nothing bad." Rosa looked skeptical but agreed. That evening, just as the sunset painted the hallway windows orange, a soft knock came at Dr. Finch's open door. Elena stood there, still in her street clothes, a simple dress and a worn coat. She looked anxious, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her eyes darted around the room, avoiding his. "Elena, please, come in. Sit down," Dr. Finch said, gesturing to a chair. He smiled, trying to put her at ease. "Thank you for coming. Would you like some tea?" She shook her head, sitting carefully on the edge of the chair. Is there problem, sir? With my work?" No problem at all. Your work is fine." He paused, choosing his words like delicate notes. "I asked you here because a colleague shared something with me, a video of you playing the piano in the concert hall last night." Elena's face went pale. She looked down at her lap, her shoulders tightening. She said nothing, but her silence was loud with fear and shame. "Elena," Dr. Finch said, his voice gentler now, "I am not angry. I am not going to report you. I am a teacher of music. What I heard in that video, it was not someone fooling around. It was the playing of a true musician. I have taught for 35 years, and I know what I heard." She still didn't look up, but a tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. She brushed it away quickly. "Where did you learn?" he asked softly. For a long moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice so quiet he had to lean forward to hear, she began to speak. The words came slowly at first, then in a steady, sad stream, as if a dam had finally broken. She spoke of a small city far away, a place of cobblestone streets and harsh winters. She spoke of a family with little money, but a love for music. An old upright piano, a gift from a neighbor, a teacher who saw something in her small, quick hands. She spoke of years of dedicated study, of local competitions won, of a scholarship offered to a conservatory in the capital, a glittering chance. Then she spoke of the cracks in the world, political unrest, a father who fell ill, the scholarship money that would never be enough for the family to survive, the difficult, painful choice. The piano was sold to pay for medicine. The dreams were packed away with the sheet music. She worked. She married. She emigrated for a better life, a safer life. Her husband, a kind man, had died young. The piano became a ghost, a beautiful, aching ghost from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else, to touch them. She whispered, finally looking at the piano-shaped paperweight on his desk. "The piano's here. It is a little pain and a little joy to remember. That night I was sad, and the quiet called me. I am sorry. I will not do it again." Dr. Finch listened, his heart feeling heavy. He had heard stories of talent interrupted by war, by poverty, by simple bad luck, but to have it living and breathing in his building, polishing the floors, it was humbling. "Elena," he said when she finished, "you have nothing to be sorry for. Music does not belong only to those who make it a career. It belongs to the soul. You have kept it alive in yours all these years, and that is a remarkable thing." He took a deep breath. "I would like to make you an offer, an official one. You may use any practice room in this building, at any time, when you are not working. You may play any piano you wish. No one will question you. No one will disturb you. Consider it a late scholarship, a right you have always earned." Elena stared at him, disbelief wiping the sadness from her face. "I cannot. I am just the cleaner." "You are a musician who cleans," Dr. Finch corrected gently, "and this is a house for musicians. Please, it would be an honor to have you use our instruments. They need to be played by hands that understand them." Another tear fell, but this one was different. It was followed by the faintest, most fragile smile he had ever seen. It was the smile of the girl in the photograph, breaking through a lifetime of clouds. She nodded, just once, unable to speak. "Good," Dr. Finch said, smiling warmly. "That's settled then." She stood to leave, moving as if in a dream. At the door, she turned back. "The young man," she said softly, "the one who is angry with the Rachmaninoff. He is not a bad boy, he just hears only the notes, not the story." Dr. Finch nodded, a new idea forming. "I think," he said, "you might be the perfect person to help him hear it." She didn't reply, but the light in her eyes, a light he hadn't seen before, was answer enough. She stepped out of the office, not as a cleaner who had been reprimanded, but as a musician who had, against all odds, been welcomed back inside. The ghost had been seen, heard, and finally, invited to stay. The news traveled through the conservatory not like a shout, but like a melody passed from ear to ear. A rumor at first, then a confirmed, wondrous fact. The quiet cleaning woman, Elena, could play. Not just play, but play in a way that made the sternest professors go quiet. The story of the Midnight Chopin, the video, Dr. Finch's intervention, it all became part of the building's legend. For Elena, the world shifted. The permission to play was a key to a locked room inside her. She still did her job with the same quiet care, but now, on her breaks or before her shift, she would slip into a practice room. The first few times, her heart hammered against her ribs. She felt like an imposter. But as her fingers found the keys in the light instead of the dark, muscle memory, deep and true, took over. The ghost inside her stepped into the sun. She didn't play for show. She played for the pure, aching joy of it. Sometimes it was simple scales, reveling in the feel. Sometimes it was the music of her youth, pieces she thought she had forgotten. The notes were rusty at first, but the soul behind them was not. Leo, the young pianist who had challenged her, heard the rumors. At first, he dismissed them. It had to be an exaggeration. Then, one afternoon, hurrying to a lesson, he heard music from a practice room. It was a Bach fugue, a complex tapestry of interweaving voices. It was played with such clarity and intelligence that he stopped to listen. He peered through the small window in the door. It was her, Elena. Her eyes were on the music, her hands moving with an economy of motion that spoke of total control. He watched, his earlier arrogance replaced by a cold knot of shame in his stomach. He had spoken to her with such contempt. He had assumed her silence was ignorance. He was the ignorant one. For days, he avoided her. The shame was too heavy, but the memory of her playing, and the memory of his own ugly words, gnawed at him. Finally, he couldn't stand it. He waited for her one evening near the service entrance as she was arriving for work. He looked nervous, his hands shoved in his pockets. "Elena," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. She turned, her expression cautious. I wanted to say I'm sorry," he blurted out, his eyes on his shoes. "For what I said that night. It was rude and stupid. I didn't know." Elena studied him. She saw not the proud student, but a young man wrestling with his own limitations. The anger she might have felt had long since melted away, leaving only a kind of understanding. "You were frustrated," she said simply. "The music was fighting you." He looked up, surprised by her lack of anger. "It still is," he admitted, the confession surprising even him. "That Rachmaninoff. I can play it, but it sounds empty. My teacher says I need to find the story, but I don't know how." Elena was silent for a moment. She thought of Dr. Finch's words. You might be the perfect person to help him hear it. She looked at Leo's earnest, troubled face. "The story is not in the loud parts," she said slowly. "It is in the quiet before them, in the space between the anger. You play the storm, but you forget the eye of the storm, where it is still." It was the first lesson. Leo, humbled, asked if she would show him. And so, an unlikely partnership began. She never took his money. She never sat in the teacher's chair. She would sit beside him on the bench after her work was done, under the cover of night. She didn't talk much about technique. She talked about feeling. "This chord," she would say, her finger hovering over the score. "It is not just loud. It is a decision, a door slamming. You must feel the wood of the door." Or, "This melody here, it is not sad because it is slow. It is sad because it is remembering something happy. Play the memory." She showed him how to listen to the silence he was creating, how to let his hands breathe. She had him play passages with his eyes closed, thinking not of his fingers, but of a specific person, a specific loss. Slowly, grudgingly, the piece began to change. The thunder became terrifying because the quiet around it was so profound. The fury had a source. Word spread of these unofficial sessions. Other students, curious and then respectful, began to greet Elena by name. They left their practice rooms less messy. They saw her not as part of the building's furniture, but as a part of its heart. As the year drew to a close, Dr. Finch had an idea. The final student recital was a major event, packed with parents and donors. The program was always filled with the best senior performers. He called Leo into his office. "You're playing the Rachmaninoff prelude," he stated. Leo nodded, nervous. "And you will play it well," Dr. Finch said. "But after the intermission, after all the students have performed, I am adding an extra piece to the program, an unscheduled performance." Leo looked confused. "By who?" Dr. Finch just smiled. The night of the recital arrived. The hall was full, a sea of expectant faces. Elena was there, too, but in the very back, standing in the shadows near the doors as she often did. She watched Leo walk onto the stage, stiff with nerves. He sat at the grand piano, took a breath, and began. She listened, and she heard it. The story, the slammed doors, the memories, the storm and its still eye. It wasn't perfect, a few notes were rushed, but it was alive. It was human. When he finished, the applause was strong and genuine. He stood, bowed, and as he walked off, his eyes scanned the dark back of the hall, looking for her. He gave a small, grateful nod into the shadows. The intermission came and went. The audience settled back into their seats, expecting the head of the department to give closing remarks. Instead, Dr. Finch walked to the center of the stage. The microphone squealed slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice warm, "we have one final performance tonight. It is not by a student, but by a member of our community who has, quietly and without any thought of reward, reminded us all why we are here. Music is not about perfection. It is about communication. It is about a life lived and stories told through our hands." He paused, looking towards the back of the hall. "Elena, would you join us, please?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Who the students knew. They turned in their seats, smiling. The parents and donors were confused. In the back, Elena froze. Her heart stopped, then hammered wildly. This was not part of the plan. This was the spotlight, the thing she had run from for a lifetime. She shook her head slightly, panic in her eyes. But then she saw Ben, the security guard, standing by the door. He gave her two thumbs up and a wide, encouraging grin. She saw Leo, standing in the wings, his hands clasped as if in prayer. She saw Dr. Finch, waiting patiently. Slowly, as if walking through deep water, she moved out of the shadows and into the aisle. Every eye was on her. She was still in her simple, best dress, nothing like the glittering gowns the younger performers wore. Her steps were small, measured. The walk to the stage felt like a mile. She climbed the steps, her legs trembling. Dr. Finch met her, took her hand gently, and led her to the piano. The spotlight, hot and white, found her. She blinked, blinded for a moment. The audience was a dark, silent mass. She sat on the bench. It felt different, exposed. She looked at the piano, this magnificent beast she had only ever touched in secret. She placed her hands in her lap, took a deep, shaky breath, and closed her eyes. In the silence, she found the girl in the photograph. She found the old upright piano. She found the years of silence, the loneliness, the quiet love that had never died. She found the kindness of a night guard, the understanding of a teacher, the earnest apology of a proud young man. Her hands rose. They hovered for a second above the keys, those familiar, calloused hands, and then they fell, not in a crash, but in the first, gentle, rocking chords of the very piece Leo had struggled with, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. But it was a different world, where Leo had played a storm of his own frustration. Elena played the storm of a life. The powerful chords were not angry. They were deep, resonant with history and loss. The furious runs were not just technical. They were the sound of time rushing by, of chances lost. And in the quiet, lyrical sections, a melody emerged that was so profoundly sad and yet so full of love, that several people in the audience found tears in their eyes without knowing why. She played the memory of music itself. When the final, thunderous notes faded, the hall was utterly silent for a long, breathless moment. Then, as one, the audience rose. The sound was not polite applause, but a roaring wave of understanding and respect. It was for the beauty they had heard, but more than that, it was for the invisible journey they had just witnessed. Elena stood, slightly unsteady. She looked out at the standing crowd, at the blur of faces, and gave a small, humble bow. Her eyes found Dr. Finch, who was clapping with tears in his own eyes. She found Leo, who was beaming. She found Ben, who was whistling loudly. She walked off the stage, not back into the shadows, but into a circle of quiet congratulations. Hands reached out to gently touch her shoulder. "Thank you," people whispered. "That was beautiful." Later, as the hall emptied, she was back at her cart, wiping a stray fingerprint from a door handle, a habit too deep to break. Leo found her. "You showed me the story," he said, his voice thick. "But tonight, you told everyone your own." She smiled, a real, full smile that softened her whole face. "No," she said softly. "Tonight, I just stopped whispering it. The genius was never hidden. It was just waiting, patiently, for the world to get quiet enough to listen." And now, it no longer lived in the shadows of a practice room. It lived in the open, in the heart of the